All right. Hello, everybody.
Hello and welcome to Fate's Wide Wheel, where Ziggy's not running at all this week.
Oh, Sam, I got some thoughts.
Oh, I know.
Some thoughts.
Oh,
I have
man.
some thoughts. I have some feelings.
Yeah. I can't wait to hear what you think. Generally we have an opportunity to talk a little bit about the episode before. I know obviously last week we didn't have that at all because you hadn't seen the episode prior to air. So everything that, you had to say, I was hearing for the first time, and last week was unique because we spoke mostly with our party crashers, the amazing assembled group of Caitlin Bassett, and Dean Georgeris and Drew Lindo and Elise. And I have her last name here, but I'm just worried that I'm going to screw some part of it up. But anyway,
sure.
Which was awesome to have them join us, and so the ability to be able to speak with the writer and two of the producers, and of course the actor as well, was just a delight. And so we didn't necessarily do our normal kind of discussion about the episode, but I don't think anyone, including these two hosts, care about that at all.
No. It was fun. It was a good time.
It was a good time. But anyway, that being said, like I said, we usually, at the very least, get the opportunity to exchange a couple of texts or say, this is kind of what I thought of it, or, oh, I have some feelings, I'll save this for the podcast or whatever. And this is an instance where, we got it at about 2:00 this afternoon, and we both watched it pretty soon after it dropped, which isn't always the case. A lot of times, like, I might get to it before you do, or there's been a few times when you've gotten it to it before I do and whatnot. But so we haven't actually talked at all about it, in spite of having watched it a few hours ago. So yeah. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Yeah, me too. All right.
Before we do all of that, should we thank some people?
Yeah, let's thank some people. Get into it. We want to thank our patrons. They help us keep the lights on here at Fate's Wide Wheel. Al's Place, Leak Bandside, Bourbon and Boardgames, Carolyn, Cosplay Dad, Joanne, Bartlett, Dana Bius, Rich Bourque, Kevin and Kevin Butcher, Carol Davis, Dan Tuhig. He is a new patron supporter. Thank you, Dan. I hope I am not butchering your last name. Deckslower, Dermot Devlin, Barry Donovan, Brian Dreadful, Troy Evers, Larry Ganni, Jason Geis, Kelly M., Michelle Hoffman, Amy Holtcamp, Laurie Johnson, Bess Korey, Lady Eternal, Robb Nunn, Oddly Specific with Audra, Christopher Redmon, Adrian Sal, Karen Saxon, Jerry Seward, Mike Stoufer, Heather Strabiak, Damon Sugamelli, Larry Trujillo, Stuart Williams, Jill Wilson, our anonymous donors, and as always, a special shout out to Jessica Conger and Betsy Freimeyer, our spouses, who provide vital childcare while we record the podcast. If you would like to become a patron, check us out in the show notes or online. You can do so monthly through patreon.com/fateswidewheel, or one-time donation, buymeacoffee.com/fateswidewheel. Or if you would like access to all of our patron perks, but you are not in a place to financially give, check us out at fateswidewheel.com/patron. Shoot us an email and you'll get on our email list.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you all so much. And I just wanted to take a moment to echo my appreciation, of course, for my spouse, my partner, Jessica Conger, because she has just been rocking it a whole hell of a lot this past week. There's been so much going on as we prepare to close on the new house and and finally get into the new place, and of course there's podcasting, and I've been, kind of running on empty lately. And as folks that listen to the show are well aware, there's been a lot of stuff in my personal life that's been going on, including with my father's current condition. And, I know that there are listeners out there that can completely understand this, sadly. And I'm so sorry that that's the case, but I know that there are people out there that will understand what I'm about to say, including my co-host, is that when you have a doctor tell you that, your parent only has a couple weeks left, and then another doctor tells you that they're going to reevaluate in a few months, it takes a toll. It plays with your emotions. And of course, I've not been shy about hiding the fact that there's been a lot of trauma in my past, in my childhood. And the transmitter of that has certainly been my father. And, it's made things very complicated, and I've been feeling really raw. And luckily I've had the opportunity to talk with my therapist. Even had an opportunity to talk with a wonderful, wonderful therapist who has a podcast, which I'll talk about some other time. But just so grateful for the chance to be able to have that. But it has certainly, I think, made me feel a little bit more raw and easily triggered by certain things. And I'm doing the best I can to handle all that. And, as I kind of ride through this portion of my life, I look in the back seat of my own personal car and I see these past versions of myself back there. And every once in a while, one of them just wants to reach forward and take the wheel out of my hands. And, where I'm at right now is realizing that, I don't want to punish that past version. I don't want to slap their hands away. I want to find an opportunity to bring them back into me fully, so that when I've got my hands on the wheel, I know that they're there, and I know the lessons that they have to offer are valid, but that that sort of fight or flight response is not necessary. So yeah, Jessica has obviously been incredible, and that valuable childcare applies to me as well as the kids right now. I want to thank all of you so much for all of your support, all of the kind words over last week's episode. We really appreciate it. That was so much fun. And, don't think for one second that we are not incredibly grateful for the fact that, Dean popped in and then brought everybody else along. It was really something special. It was special for us. And I hope that you enjoyed it as much as we did, just to have that conversation. It really is a lovely, incredible group of humans that work on this show. I hope people know that and realize that, because it's true. They are special, and I'm sure there are other shows out there that you could say that about, but this just happens to be our show, and the fact that we get to say that about the people that work on it is pretty awesome, because they are a special bunch, and really wonderful, compassionate, empathetic humans, as well as just being entertaining as fuck, and intelligent and passionate creators and artists. And it's wonderful to get to see them grow and continue to tell these stories in whatever capacity they get to do that. So I'm just grateful for that. And of course that financial support is very meaningful, and it is without a doubt going to help us keep the lights on for as long as we get the chance to do this. So we're really appreciative of that. That said, of course, it is always important to try to make a difference wherever we can, especially in our communities or the world at large. And we encourage you to do that, to right some wrongs and to be helpers. Right now, I certainly encourage people to look at charities like the Trevor Project, PFLAG, the ACLU, the Lambda Project. These are incredibly important organizations that are working right now to deal with these threats to life, to humanity, to people that are just trying to live their most authentic lives and be themselves in a world that doesn't necessarily want them to be. And that is maddening, and it's sad, and it has had a profound effect on me. And even recently, there was a conversation that took place in social media on our Twitter, with someone that had some questions. And I think at first it was easy to approach those questions in a spirit of, it's kind of like the lessons that Deborah gave us. What would Deborah Pratt do? And just let's have a conversation, and let's see what we can do about this. And I felt like things maybe got left in a good way, in a positive light. And then they kind of came back with some things that I found to be very hurtful, and to certainly misconstrue things. Let's be clear. No one is requiring children, or anyone for that matter, to attend drag shows or drag queen reading story times. No one is making that a requirement. And I don't think that, I think that just as human beings, no one would want someone to be in a place that they don't want to be in. And so it is not a requirement, obviously. And, one of the things that this led me to, and luckily I have an incredible friend and co-host who is able to kind of pull me back and remind me that maybe this isn't the way you want to do this. And it got me thinking a lot about the past 6 or 7 months. And I decided that it was definitely time to do this, but as you said, it was time to do it my way. I've not necessarily been hiding things too much. People may have noticed the change of pronouns on the screen when they see some of our recordings, some of the nature of conversations that we've had over these past few months. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to say, hi, I'm Sam, and I am non-binary, and my pronouns are they, them, and I am pan-romantic, and I am so lucky and grateful to have people in my life that have been incredibly supportive and have been there for me. And it's, been a thrilling and exciting and frightening and maddening time, to say the least. But in the process of coming out to friends and family, not all of whom I have had the chance to do so yet, it was important to me to be able to do it kind of in a public space as well. And again, partly because I just haven't necessarily been hiding it. So I wanted to do that. I wanted to do that here and now. It's Trans Visibility Week, and I just felt like it was an opportunity to kind of say that here on the record before we dive into our conversation about Fly the Friendly Skies.
Yeah. Hello, Sam. Nice to know you.
Thank you, Dennis. I appreciate that. Give you a virtual cheers with my decaf Earl Grey.
I'm drinking a Klostauer, Howler. How do you pronounce it? Klostauer?
Howler, I think, maybe.
Howler, yes, a non-alcoholic. Yes, that.
Because
if you live near Trader Joe's, friends, don't take it for granted. Now that we live where we live, it's 45 minutes to the nearest Trader Joe's, and yeah, we did a Trader Joe's run yesterday.
I'm glad for you. I might hit up Trader Joe's tomorrow, actually, but I will not take for granted the fact that it is not 45 minutes away. Just if you needed any other possible confirmation of this, the fact that I'm drinking decaf tea and you're drinking non-alcoholic beer at 9:30 on a Sunday is about. I mean, that is the two tired parents.
That is the tired dad.
To do.
Yeah. We started this Sunday afternoon sipping whiskey in Sam's basement. That's right. Not so much anymore. All right. So speaking of,
what a ride it's been.
What a ride. So
wait, one more quick thing.
Yes. Yeah.
Happy 34th birthday to Quantum Leap. 34 years ago today, as we record this, not when we release it, but 34 years ago today, Genesis premiered on NBC.
I was wondering why that date was kicking around in my head. Something.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt, but yeah, I just wanted to get that out there.
We get together. Happy 34th birthday. Well, let's get into I was going to do a segue, but let's get into.
I killed it. I'm sorry.
No. It was a weak segue anyway. Something about sipping cocktails on an airplane or something. I don't know.
I brought your plane of thought crashing into the sea. Huh?
I like it. All right. Yeah, the segue got lost. All right, here we go. There we go.
That tickled me. Thank you.
So Friendly Skies. I actually have the episode description this week. When Ben leaps aboard a 1970s passenger jet as a flight attendant, he must outwit its hijackers before it mysteriously crashes into the Atlantic. Worse, he has to do it all without Ziggy's help.
Doom, doom, doom. This episode was written by Alex Berger and directed by Linda Mendoza. And let me get my non-spoiler thoughts out of the way here. I really enjoyed it. I have to be completely honest. I had the opportunity to read a few pages here and there, 4 or 5 months ago, maybe not quite that. And when I was reading it, it did not arrest me the way that some other pages that we had the opportunity to read had. And I was a little like, okay, what's this one going to be like? Knowing that Ben Interrupted seemed like it was going to be a big episode, which it was. And obviously the finale is going to be a big episode. It made me kind of wonder, are we going to kind of have like a valley in between two peaks here? I am so happy to say that I was completely wrong. And sometimes it is so important to be able to see something on screen, because there are things that you read that you think read really well, and then they get on screen and you're sort of like, ooh, maybe not. And then there are things that you read and you're just kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, that's fine. And then you see it and you're like, oh, right, that's the magic of television. Because I really liked it. I thought that there was so much to like about it. I loved the setting, being on an airplane, the setup right away, of course, that this plane is going to go down. I mean, that is one of the things that terrifies me more than just about anything on the face of the planet. So immediately I'm kind of, engaged on that level. The tension is ratcheted up for me. And the stuff back at the project I thought was so wonderful. I don't think this is an exaggeration. Some of the strongest headquarters stuff that we have had so far. And the reason why it benefits from a lot of what's, the groundwork that's been laid before it, because we get the opportunity to have them helping to solve this mystery while also moving the character arcs and the overall story arc forward. And that to me was done in such a seamless manner that this episode might have felt like the first one where both things fit together just so perfectly, to the point where I almost hesitate to make the distinction between Leap and Project. This just felt like Quantum Leap. Like, this is just the show. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it a great deal. Obviously, we'll get into some spoiler stuff later. There are some big reveal moments that happen. There's some big payoffs that come. There's some great fan moments that people I think are just going to be so incredibly excited to see. And then the ending. I mean, the ending is great. The leap out is fantastic, and where it leaves us for the finale. I mean, I don't want it to end, but man, they are about to pay off, and the road to get here has been great, but damn, we're in for it now. And so, yeah. And I love the fact that, there was a lot, each character had a lot of agency in this episode. There was stuff that, that Ben got to do in the leap, really take control of things, which was great. There's stuff that Ian did back at HQ. There's stuff that Addison was doing, some of the stuff that, the input that Magic had, that Jen had. Everyone felt like they were really working on things, and yes, they were all working towards the same goal, but there were kind of separate pieces and separate functions that everyone had to move things forward in a way that I thought was really nice. The character of Korey, played by Casey Simpson, I just, what an endearing, wonderful performance all the way. Natalie Britton as Holly, I thought, similarly, just an endearing performance, some wonderful moments with Raymond. And yeah, everybody showed up to play, and I really liked it. I thought it was a very strong episode.
That's interesting. This one was a mixed bag for me.
All right.
And here's the thing. I would love to have seen the Leap story somewhere else in the season or next season. I would love to see a 1970s airplane disaster genre episode that we really get to fully invest in there. And so you kind of get to play into the genre. You get to have Ben explore into, the simple sexism of being a stewardess in that era, which,
right.
They, no pun intended, but it's the first thing that pops in my head. They touched on in earlier in the episode, and just yes. What airplane culture was back then with it, with the steaks and the meals and I think even the lobster, I think they mentioned. And right. I would have loved to have seen that episode because we're about the same age. I'm sure you saw your share of airplane disaster movies when you were a kid. Oh, sure. And I'm sure you've heard that joke. When I was a kid, I thought quicksand was going to be a much bigger problem. And after the episode today, I realized that when I was a kid, I thought being on a hijacked airplane was just something that was going to happen at some point in my life.
Sure.
That has a
or
whole
door
lot
was
more.
going to get ripped off, or something like that. Yeah, totally.
And of course, that has a whole lot more weight post 9/11, and not to be insensitive to that, but it's just you saw these stories in movies all the time. When we were kids. So I just I'm going to be on an airplane that gets hijacked sometime. Yeah. I would love to have seen that episode as it was, I was just kind of about the story. And you mentioned, like, I love Casey Simpson as Korey, but he's the only character in the episode that really has any kind of substantial character growth.
Sure.
And because of the budget limitations of the show, we don't get to see him do the heroic thing.
Sure, that's a good point.
And so, yeah, I saw the potential in what the Leap story could be. It just kind of left me, The HQ story, I just thought it was a mess. And
weird. Okay.
Like, I mean, the character stuff that is given, I love, and it's great. The actual plotting of it and where they built off left me wanting, in particular around what it means for Ziggy to be the mole and what it means to shut Ziggy down. And the thing, it's like Ziggy being the mole was such a huge reveal at the end of the last episode, like in the way they pulled back and the way Ziggy's lights turn red. And just rewatching the episode earlier this week, there was a shot that I don't know if you noticed, because we didn't talk about it in last week's episode. There's one shot where Ian gives Addison a piece of information, and Addison's like, "Oh, thanks Ziggy for me," and she walks off, and the camera pulls back in such a way that it looks like one of Ziggy's columns is lurking, like listening in on the conversation. And I thought that was a really powerful shot. And what the reveal of what Ziggy being the mole means left me just really kind of disappointed. And I've already brought the show up once as a joke in this episode, but it kind of reminds me of Lost, in that for the 6 years that Lost was on, from 2004 2010, like, that was appointment television for me. If I didn't watch it
for sure,
I watched it in the first couple of days. Sam, in the 13 years since that show has gone off the air, I have watched maybe a few minutes of an episode here or there, because really, in the end, all of the mystery was a lot of smoke and mirrors. And like, while the character stuff was great, the mystery stuff ended up being kind of disappointing. And the thing I'm worried about is that after we get to the end of the season, when we go back and watch the first season, it's not going to have as much rewatchability, because the overall mystery is going to kind of be a little disappointing. And I'll get more into that into the next section.
You know, I just real quickly, I think that there are certain episodes that will probably not hold up to repeat viewing as well as others. I think that there are definitely at least, I mean, I would go so far as to say probably at least half the season that will hold up to repeat viewings. Now, whether or not Fly the Friendly Skies is one of those, I'm not sure yet. But, you know, I think Ben's Song for the Defense, I think SOS, I think, you know, somebody up there likes Ben, you know, just those three off the top of my head, Paging Dr. Song, Fellow Travelers, you know, I really think that those episodes especially will hold up to repeat viewings. It's interesting. Well, yeah. All right. Well, let's get into the deeper conversation and see where we get. So see where we go. Yeah, you know, right off the bat, let's talk about what it means for Ziggy to be the mole, because I do think that that's important, and it's something that a lot of people will want, you know, the follow up on. Now, I think that there's been enough hints, you know, going back to what Janice said in the interrogation with Addison, that it's not about an antagonistic, like, evil force opposing Project Quantum Leap necessarily, so much as it is about information itself. Once it's known, it can be used for whatever purpose, you know, people want, right? Like, it kind of goes back to when the Congresswoman came to visit the project. When they found out about her brother's death in the car accident, they were able to use that to get what they wanted from her, right? And I think that when you look at the project itself, and what we're seeing as the present is the future's past. Okay. So from that notion, whatever happens at the project, especially while Ziggy is online, Ziggy knows. And that information can then be used to, the will of whoever happens to be in charge of the project at the time. Because regardless of how advanced an AI Ziggy is, ultimately Ziggy is there to serve, the purposes of whomever is controlling the AI, right? And so I think that when we think of things like the mole, right? Ziggy's a mole. We take that to mean like, oh, Ziggy's spying, and Ziggy is this evil force that is feeding information to, potentially an even more evil force. And obviously that's not the case. The setup here simply is that Ziggy is being used in the future by the future runners of the project in order to thwart whatever it is that Ben is trying to do for whatever reason. And we have to have enough faith and trust in our characters, much like, Ben has a crisis of faith in this episode. We have to have enough faith in our characters, which I think we already do, like in Ian and Ben, that they're trying to do the right thing. And so that makes us view this future project, which is using Ziggy and using the information that Ziggy was able to collect during, its time there at the project, because, the present is the future's past, in order to oppose what Ian set into motion and what Ben is now currently trying to accomplish. So I think that the idea that we're viewing Ziggy as evil, or that this is like, a precursor to the Evil Leaper project or whatever, I mean, that to me, it's like, well, that's on your assumptions, and it's okay to have those subverted and upended. And I think that that's kind of what the show is doing by saying like, well, it's not necessarily that. It's just that the information that's out there, that, there are no secrets, that's just being used against us.
Sure. I get your points. My hang up in this is like, I understand like Ziggy being used in the future by the future project. They threw that idea out as early as what a disaster. And so if that's the case, why weren't they taking more precautions of thinking about like, oh, what does it mean if Ziggy is being used in the future by Martinez? How do we protect ourselves from that? And just the overall idea, like, just the plotting, and just like by using the word like the mole, which I think they, like, like Janice and her interrogation scene, like they kind of threw that out a couple episodes, like there's somebody here that can't be trusted. And just like the way the last episode ended off with, it's so important that Janice takes Magic's phone and crushes it on the ground. It's like, no one can hear this. Ziggy is the mole. And using the word the mole when really that's not even what Janice meant at all. Like I said, it was kind of leading viewers down a road, and I felt it was a little bit of a letdown. And it's like, it's so important, like she crushes Magic's phone because like no one, like Ziggy cannot hear this in any way. Where does Magic have the conversation about shutting Ziggy down in this episode? Right in the middle of HQ. Like,
sure.
And so it's that, and it's also tied into the fact that if they think it is so important to shut Ziggy down so that Martinez or the future project cannot use that information in any way, if they want to stop this plot, this whole plot in its tracks, what is Ian doing still working there, knowing that they're going to leap in the future?
I think that calls into a lot of questions, like, time travel stuff, right? Because at this point, if they try to prevent Ian from traveling to the past to tell Ben that he has to leap, then all of, everything that's happened thus far will never happen, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that there's got to be a danger to that. We see the way that the project works and the way that time travel works on the show. We see it from a perspective of these characters are aware up to a point of these changes. At the very least, they are able to identify kind of in the moment, this is a change, this is new. through the magic of television and time travel, right? If you think about it too much, will it hold up? Who knows?
Sure.
It's one of those things where it's kind of like, it's important to be able to invest and believe in this stuff and have that suspension of disbelief at the same time. But if you try too hard, most of this stuff will fall apart. You know what I mean? And that holds true for, pretty much any time that time travel has been used, anywhere, right? Like, it's like, eventually, like, it's probably going to fall apart under a lot of scrutiny. That said, like, I think that it's one of those things that these are human beings, and if you had a trusted friend that was going to do something that might jeopardize the future in any way, especially if it was in a way that you thought you could overcome. I think that's the other thing, right? All of these characters believe firmly they're going to get Ben back and they're going to succeed at their mission. Like, they believe that whatever Ben is doing, he will succeed and they will succeed in aiding him. And whether that's pride or hubris, whatever, it doesn't, that's another conversation. So I think just by virtue of that, the notion that they would, like, put Ian out to pasture and kind of say, like, hey, you can't do this anymore because we're worried about what you're going to do in the future, it doesn't resonate with me based off of who these people are. Sure. Now, I will say that you make some incredibly valid points about, like, the way that, that they choose to shut down Ziggy and have that conversation. And you also have to look at it from the perspective of, like, what does shutting down Ziggy mean in the long run? Now, here is where I am willing to give them the grace of, we got one more episode to find out. Because this episode was less about, to me, what happens when you shut Ziggy down, as much as it was about, getting from point A to point B. And in the midst of that, we have to deal with some of this, some of this, like, psychic residue, some of this trauma that these characters have been through. Ben has just been stabbed in the neck and almost bled out, with his holographic fiance sitting next to him. Ian, we've been dealing now with a number of episodes, having the knowledge that they are going to, at some point, step into the accelerator and leap. And I think that there are opportunities in this episode where they even start to have that conversation and it's cut short, right? So for me, it's one of the reasons why I think I had those initial fears, right? Where it felt like this episode might be a detour before we get to the end point. But after watching the episode, I just don't mind that. So it's hard for me to argue too much with the criticisms that you have. And yet at the same time, for me personally, I didn't mind the fact that we didn't address some of this stuff head on, because it felt like we didn't, with the pace of the show as the whole, we didn't necessarily need to do that yet, I guess. But there is a caveat there. Sure. That's if they get there next week.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's like, I understand all of that. Like, everything gets really timey-wimey. I mean, if you scrutinize any time travel plot too much, it's gonna get messed up. But when I go back and I rewatch Ben Interrupted, I am gonna get annoyed at that last scene, and then how dramatic it is, and that Ziggy is the mole. Because ultimately, it really means nothing. And further to the point of, like, what it talks about to shut, what it means to shut Ziggy down. What we learned in this episode is that it doesn't really mean anything. The handling still works. The imaging chamber is still online. They're able to do research. They're able to find stuff in the past. While they didn't directly address it, from the end moments, I got that they still could monitor Ben's vitals in some way. So basically, short of Ziggy, like, running probabilities of what Ben is there to do, there wasn't so much that Ziggy was doing, or that Ziggy couldn't have. My overall point is, like, it didn't really seem to affect the plot of the episode of shutting Ziggy down at all. And so they make this huge deal about it. And as far as, like, what it contributes to the story, it only really contributes to Ian taking it personally, because Ian is so intertwined with Ziggy. And I feel like Ian has already got enough on their plate knowing that they are going to leap in the future. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do.
To me, it's like, I mean, we saw this like as far back as I'm confusing the original pilot, What a Disaster, in the first episode. Like in the first episode, Ziggy is not online at the beginning of the thing, but still, Ben is able to leap, the hand link still works and all of that. So all of that is still there. But like this episode just proves like what does Ziggy really do other than run some calculations, because they were able to do everything without Ziggy. So if it was a thing like you're going to shut Ziggy down and Ben really has to do this leap on his own because they can't even send Addison back, awesome.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I didn't really see what the point was.
Sure. You know, I think that this is one of those things that there are multiple angles to approach this. One of those angles is examining what Ziggy means specifically to the original series, and also as it relates to the revival. Also, to think about thematically the ideas of technology, and you know, and the pitfalls of said technology, while also, of course, still being surrounded by, as you pointed out, surrounded by technology that aids them in completing their mission. So the first part of that is like, let's look at Ziggy as a function of the original series, not necessarily like in the show world, but in the real world, right? You look at the fact that they needed to have a device that could tell Al, who could then tell Sam what it was that they were there to do, and how Sam could best go about accomplishing that, right? That's just a function of the story. Mm-hmm. You know, there was no other real true value placed on Ziggy, especially in the early seasons of the show. So much so that Ziggy's gender changed a few times, that, you know, that did Ziggy have a personality? Maybe Ziggy had a personality. You know, there was a lot of confusion about that, because ultimately what was important is we need a device in order to get Sam information about what it is that he is there to do. And that's it, right? Like there's no, because the alternative is that the leaps had to be planned, right? Like the alternative would be that Sam has to know where he's going, when he's going, and what he's there to do ahead of time. And because that was not the conceit, right? The conceit is that he didn't have that information, that this all went wrong, that he was bouncing around in time with no idea of when he was going to land, and certainly wanting to get home. And so they needed a way to get that information. So as a function, like that's all Ziggy was there to do. Now, as the show went on, of course, now Ziggy has a personality, Ziggy has an attitude, Ziggy has, you know, the ability to get things wrong. And I think that as that morphed and as that happened, Ziggy became a character, right? Ziggy became the unseen, oftentimes, third character of the show, like permanently. Yes, we got to see Gushy on occasion. Yes, we saw Verbena. Yes, you know, obviously the leap back, we saw these other characters, but like Ziggy was always there for them. Flash forward, and now because we have this headquarters stuff, how essential is Ziggy, right? Now, obviously, Ziggy still filled an important function because Ziggy was able to calculate, you know, what it was that Ben is there to do in a quick fashion and parse through that data far quicker than anyone else could. You get the sense that luck was definitely on their side a number of times, the HQ team's side a number of times when they were able to uncover some of this information. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, I see the need for Ziggy, and yet at the same time, I see that there isn't necessarily a need for Ziggy in this iteration of the show. Now, part of that is let's look at it from the external, right? The function of Ziggy. Like, in this day and age, with where technology is, we basically have Ziggy, right? Like in our pockets, sure, at our fingertips. So what's more interesting? To have this parallel hybrid computer that has this attitude and Deborah Pratt's voice, or to have a group of human characters that we can relate to and learn from and be invested in a way that we probably really wouldn't necessarily be, you know, as much in Ziggy. Now, one could say as a criticism that maybe we should be more invested in Ziggy, and maybe Ziggy's getting shut down should be as meaningful to us as it is to Ian. But again, that's not the show that they're writing. You know what I mean? So I guess the question that I'm left with is that if this is how it's been set up and this is where we're at now, I don't necessarily understand why there is a problem with the way that, that Ziggy is shut down and the way that they're still able to surmount these things.
The thing is, it's by the way that they shut Ziggy down and they're still able to do all this. It's like the episode kind of like you said, it inadvertently points out that Ziggy is kind of useless. And if you're going to do that, why have the plot at all? Why have the subplot at all?
Well,
yeah.
I mean, I guess my response to that would be is that they probably felt like they had to, right? Like, for all we know, Ziggy will be back by the end of next episode, and next season Ziggy will still be a factor, right? I'm not saying that they're writing Ziggy out of the show, but I will say that, and it certainly doesn't seem like that's the case, because it seems like at the WonderCon panel they alluded to Ziggy being in the second season, so it seems like Ziggy will be back online. But we don't know how different, they will be. Ziggy will be. We don't know what changes might be made based off of what's going to happen next week. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that, like, Ziggy feels like something that they had to include, right? They couldn't not include Ziggy. They can get away with not including the waiting room. Well, not to everybody, but you know what I mean? But like, they couldn't do a show without Ziggy. So I guess maybe, maybe we need to look at it as like perhaps this examination of what Ziggy means and whether or not Ziggy is important or not is part of the point.
Sure. I feel like we can go round and round in circles on this, but like I said, my overall point is now Ziggy is the mole at the end of last episode means nothing. And when I go back and I rewatch the last episode, it's just going to annoy me. And if you're going to make a big deal about shutting Ziggy down, show how that affects the project. Because what they showed in this particular story, it didn't really affect the project at all, other than it kind of crushing Ian's ego a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily agree with that, because I felt like the reveal of Ziggy being the mole is still kind of a big deal, and I feel like it does impact things. I do agree with the fact that, yes, they're still able to do all of these things without Ziggy, so it makes you question how essential is Ziggy to the project. I certainly get all that, but I don't know. That's sure. Again, that's just not something that I saw. That's not how it impacted me, but
sure.
Hey.
But that's, yeah. Thank you for hearing me out. That's my beef with that.
Where to next?
Story. Yeah, the leap story.
Yeah. So, like setting things on an airplane, right? And having the plane get hijacked. That could be looked at as a bold move. It has to be done in such a way, in my opinion, that does not feel too terribly insensitive. Like, like you said, there was a time when movies or television programs or television movies with hijacked airplanes were a dime a dozen. That's not something we see a lot of these days. See a lot in books. Like, there are a lot of books out there where, that's a plot point or whatever. Sure. But, that said, I really appreciated a couple of things about the way the hijacking was handled. And there's other things to talk about in the leap story, but I just want to talk about this real quick. I love the fact that we get this red herring about the IRA. The reason why I love that is not because it paints the IRA as villains, but because of what it does when it gets upended. The idea that seems to be the easy route to go, and then all of a sudden you realize, like, oh no, that's not the case at all, right? It's like the IRA is not responsible for that. Now, it's worth noting, 1971, which is when this episode takes place, August 5th, 1971. We're really kind of at the height of the Troubles. We're just a few months shy, about 5 months shy of Bloody Sunday, which was in January of 72. 71 in particular was when the IRA really stepped up their insurgency. That was actually what it was labeled as. I don't necessarily completely see it that way, but that's all besides the point. So the idea that was something that they kind of were drawn to, especially when they find out, of course, that Holly's boyfriend had connections to the IRA. I thought was interesting. I was a little concerned about it at first because I just thought to myself, "Oh, is that really where we're going to go?" So when it got upended, I really appreciated that. I also appreciated the fact that at the end of the day, it kind of boiled down to money, right? And I love the fact that they also were able to paint this picture of like, you know, disgruntled employees. They're sick and tired, and they're pissed off at their millionaire boss, and you know, not being treated fairly, and you know, the fact that you've got basically the policewoman nanny of the boss's son, you know, is in on it with the co-pilot and everything. You know, it worked for the purposes of drama and stuff. It was interesting to me that, you know, the police officer, you know, points the gun at Ben and Korey, and then we come back from break and we've got two guys with automatic rifles stalking the aisles, and I was sort of like, where the hell did they come from? that was one moment where I was just kind of like, wait a minute, I feel like I missed something. Now, of course, back at HQ, it was explained a little bit, but yeah. But anyway, I felt like at that point, it set into motion again. Sometimes, you know, I think that the thing about TV shows in general is that sometimes things happen. You know, a plot can hold together also because of what it propels our characters to do. And I think in this instance, with where it took Ben and you know, the crisis of faith he was having, not only in other people but in himself, the way that this kind of got him to act and to make some realizations, especially before he gears up before the season finale. I think just looking at it in terms of that, it felt successful to me, and I enjoyed it. And mostly I enjoyed the character of Korey quite a bit. I really did.
Mm-hmm. I really, as the episode went on, I was like, oh, they're not just going to make him like a 2-dimensional entitled douchebag. Like, oh, like they're actually going to give him substance. Okay, awesome, great.
Right.
You know, he in the end he ends up having more substance than the entitled douchebag of a boyfriend in Ghost Ship from the classic series. But anyway, I agree with everything that you said in that. I don't necessarily have a huge problem with anything in the Leap story. I just wish it was expanded more so the story could breathe a little bit more. Because I did appreciate the crisis of faith that Ben has, and like he's not really sure that he can trust anybody, or like he can like even like trust his instincts now after what happened with Martinez. And I like the speech that Addison gives him at the end. It was like no, like, and I love I know there's a principle that's called, I don't know what the name of the principle is, but I love that Addison like basically explains it's like, no, like even though Martinez ended up like stabbing you in the neck, it was still a good decision to trust him earlier because there was no way you were going to get out without him. And it's like you made the best decision with the information that you had at the time, and it turned out wrong. That is not a wrong decision. Things turned out badly, but it wasn't a wrong decision. I don't know the name of the principle. I'm just thinking like the quote from the one episode of Star Trek The Next Generation where Picard says, you know, you can do everything right and still lose.
Yeah.
You know, that is not a flaw, that is life. And so I really appreciate that. And I kind of love like the meta comedy of Ben really struggles with giving inspirational speeches in this episode because of the place that he's in.
Yeah.
And, you know, it really doesn't like come around until the end where he's able to give Korey the inspirational speech to, you know, to go do the plot device to realign the things with the other things that allows him to land the plane. And I also appreciate the subtle thing. And this is the first time I think I've ever seen this in any Leap, but Ben had 5 o'clock shadow. And I don't know if it was just a production thing and Raymond Lee didn't have a chance to shave from the last episode, but it was like, it was a very nice, subtle way to show that Ben was run down and not his best self.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's interesting because one of the things that I enjoyed about this episode was the humor. I thought the humor was really well done. The thing that was nice about it too is I felt like it illustrated a lot of what you were saying just now about Ben's mental state and about his capacity to connect with other people. The fact that he was using, you know, sarcasm and wit as a tool to kind of deal with the incessant picking about oh, my prime rib's too rare, and oh, there's too much grenadine in this, and oh, I want this kind of ice cream, and and all this sort of stuff that somebody's grabbing his ass, and the fact that like the tool that came out of his toolbox to deal with all of this was kind of this sarcastic wit, as opposed to just kind of carrying on like normal. Because I feel like we've in past, like we've seen a Ben who is much more liable to kind of like let the information come, process it, and then figure out how to deal with it. And we've seen a couple of moments where certainly he's started to lose his cool a little bit about stuff, certainly like paging Dr. Song or whatever, but for the most part, like he's really kind of maintained a certain level of coolness throughout a lot of these leaps, while also being very proactive. So I think you're right on about the state of mind that he was in this leap. And I think a lot of that, is just, again, it's due to the trauma of the fact that he got stabbed and betrayed, and the lack of faith that he thinks he has in himself and others at this point is completely betrayed by his own instincts, which do win out at the end of the day. And I think that that's a really, really nice way for him to kind of surmount that damage that was done to him in the prior episode. Now, to your point about letting it breathe, I would love to see that. And I wonder, like, in a perfect world, if we got 24 episodes, or if we were on, HBO or Netflix or something where we got, 55 minutes in an episode, I think that we could definitely get more time with some of these things and some of these other characters. Unfortunately, the reality is that we just don't, right? And so I think that that's one of those things that sometimes we have to look at the limitations of a network show. And I personally think that they continually exceed and surpass those limitations in a lot of ways. The interactions, with Addison, like early on, I thought were wonderful. And, you can tell at this point that like she wants him back. And I mean, she always has, right? But like, this is no longer about, to me, this is no longer about Ziggy says you're here to do this. This is whatever it takes. We're bringing you home, and we're doing it tomorrow, like, or today, or what, what I mean? And I appreciated that kind of sense of urgency about this, because again, I felt like it gave us some really nice momentum heading into the finale.
I agree with all of that. For the most part. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, I get the limitations of network TV. And along with that, this is another nitpicky thing. This is, I want, the next time we talk to Dean or other people from the show, like, I want to know, like what their decision is not doing this. And this, we have a scene in the middle where Ben is talking to the hijackers in the cockpit. We get an extended sequence of Ben talking with them through the intercom. And I just really wish that when they did those scenes, instead of hearing Raymond Lee's voice, we heard the actor's voice of the person, like, because we are seeing things from a completely different perspective. We are seeing things, in this case, from the hijackers' perspective. I would have loved, like, especially like when they were coming in on the co-pilot and like all of the things that Ben was saying, I would have loved to have seen the co-pilot processing that coming out of a woman.
Sure.
Well, because we know the era, we know, yes, yeah.
No, I mean, that's something that we talked about with the classic series too. Like all the times that we would see POV shots, from a bystander seeing Sam talking to thin air. There's almost this idea of like, well, why are we seeing Sam here? Why shouldn't we be seeing the Leapee talking to thin air, right? Yeah. Like, and how cool that could be, and whatever, I mean, at this point, here's the weird thing. At this point, I feel like if they did do that, it would seem weird. Do you know what I mean? Because it hasn't been done before.
Sure. I mean, their chance to do it was at the start of this new series.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I completely agree. And like that would have been, yeah. And now, it's fine. Like that is like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, that is so minimal, but it is, but I do think that's an interesting idea. It is though. It's an interesting idea.
So, I mean, let's talk, and the like the end of the episode with like Korey coming around and Korey like being an essential part of this episode. And forgive me, like I cannot remember, like what are the details? Like he has to crawl underneath and reconnect something with the other
The
thing.
hydraulic,
It's basically the thing in Star Trek, like we have to take power away from life support to
reroute
reroute that's the magic thing in sci-fi. Let's just reroute the thing, and you can
reroute the negative power coupling.
Exactly, yes, reroute, and the thing is, like,
inverted or whatever,
inverted, and so it's undercut by the fact, and I'm sure this has to do with budget and filming limitations, like we don't get to see Korey doing that. And you talked about like earlier in the episode how it's jarring. We come back from the commercial break and we have these two guys with AK-47s walking down the aisle. Like, where the hell were they before? It was jarring at the end of the episode when Ben lands the plane and you see Korey back in his seat. Like, there's a very clear shot of Korey back in his seat in the airplane. Sure. And it's like, I get it. Like, after he redid the power couplings or whatever, he obviously had to get back in his seat for the plane to land. But the fact that we didn't get to see him do the thing at all. And like, that was his thing. Like, that was his character development. That's what Ben's last speech was all about. It was like, you've had everything done for you your entire life. This is your chance to do something for yourself and do something great. And the fact that we didn't get to see it. Meanwhile, you have this scene between Ben and Ian, which is lovely.
Oh God, it was fucking awesome.
And I get from a storytelling perspective where the episode ends off, like they wanted to like jump ahead and make sure that we knew like Ben and Ian had a relationship and they kind of had a rapport before even the next episode starts. Like, Sam, did I miss why they even brought Ian into the imaging chamber at all?
So Ian had run the flight simulator basically, and
got it. Okay, all right,
and so Ian had that fucking awesome alternative hand link, which was cool to see again. Projected the like video game like HUD on the the front of the plane so that Ben could land and everything. But just to rewind a couple of things. First of all, this is exactly my perspective on what you just said. It would have been so great to see Korey reconnect, or connect the hydraulics and everything. It would have been so cool to see Addison, much like we got to see Al in the original series a few times, like talking to someone that can't hear her, talking, sitting there and be like, no, Korey, over here. Like, it would have been fun. It would have been intense. Like, I think that she would have obviously, like, Caitlin is so assured as Addison now. Like, there were moments in this episode in particular where, like, I just thought her performance was just so lovely and nuanced, and she just continues to do some of this stuff that I'm just kind of like, man, that is really lovely. And so, yes, I agree with you. However, from the perspective of, like, let's just say that existed at one point, right? Like, whether it was in the script or made it before a camera or whatever, let's just hypothesize that actually existed, what you're talking about. I think that unfortunately it would have taken a lot away from the stuff between Ben and Ian. And I think ultimately the most important part, and this is why, again, what I said earlier could be turned against the show, honestly, about the leaps being a vehicle for these character moments at times. They're not always that, but in this episode, I feel like the leap is kind of a vehicle for a lot of these character beats that we have. And while some could use that as a criticism, I am on the other side of the fence on that. And so for me, this moment is less about Korey accomplishing this thing for us to see, right? So much as it is about the connection between Ben and Ian and the moments that they get to share as Ben lands the plane. Because at the end of the day, like, Ben's our hero, right? I mean, we've literally heard those words uttered a couple of weeks ago. So while I hard agree with how cool it would have been to see Korey like complete his mission, right? How that would have been really cool to see. I think if I'm looking at it from that perspective of, like, sometimes you have to, like, kill your darlings, right? Like, it feels to me like the stronger choice, in my opinion, is to show Ian and Ben together as opposed to show what Korey's doing and intercut that with those moments between Ben and Ian. Because I feel like we would have lost some of the power.
And the thing is, I mean, for timing, like, you probably had to choose something. And like I said, for budget, like, they probably weren't able to film this thing. But I think the episode loses power because, like, the show is also about the change that Ben or Sam is able to inspire in someone else. And in this case, it was a case of telling and not showing, because we didn't get to see the person like struggling and physically doing the thing.
Do you think so? What you're saying is Korey actually rehooking the avionics? That's the important thing, because for me, the important thing was actually Ben getting Korey to go do it. Like Korey making the choice to say, yes, I'm going to do this. That to me is actually more important than Korey actually rehooking the avionics.
And I think by that same token, was it important to see Ben land the plane?
Well, I mean, on
Why
one
don't they
hand,
just cut ahead a few? I mean, it's the same. They just cut ahead a few minutes later. It's like, okay, that happened. That happened. Ben was able to land the plane. We're all safe now. You know what I mean?
I mean, yeah, I would say it is important to see him do it. But furthermore, again, the thing that I'll fall back to is it's more important to see the stuff between Ben and Ian. Like, I would not want to lose 1 second of that scene between Ben and Ian.
I mean, I get, yeah, that scene was great and it was important. And like I said, I know in the end it was definitely a budget thing. But my overall point is, like, it took me out of the episode, like, oh, like we're not seeing Korey do that thing, and now the plane lands, and now Corey's back in his seat. It's kind of weird. So yeah,
I mean, I would also think that the wrap up, the idea that Korey goes on to be like the longest tenured pilot and stuff like that is also important, because I think that that's something that never would have happened in the original history. Like, this is somebody that wouldn't have had the confidence, that wouldn't have believed in themselves, that wouldn't have trusted themselves, you know. And I think that, again, that's the point, right? Like Ben's speech, like his,
Korey would have been in the ocean in the alternate history.
Well, okay, yes, exactly, but.
I mean, which by the way, because before we started recording, we were texting back and forth. We were trying to figure out like the date of the episode, and I went back and I paused on the article that Ian is reading.
Yes,
earlier in the episode, and like the snippets that you can read, like there's like, it's funny because like earlier in the episode, you know, they talk about how Korey's parents don't even like him, and they ship him off with like a nanny, babysitter, former cop, whatever. And like the last part of the newspaper story is them quoting the dad about like how much I love my son and I would just love to see him one more time and blah blah blah, and I will not rest until I find out why. Anyway, just to say, it was an interesting tidbit, like if you freeze frame the article.
No, I mean, I love that stuff. It's interesting because I think there's a lot of little cool things that come out of this episode, you know, in addition to some of the stuff that we're talking about. And I don't want to necessarily lose sight of some of that, because one of the cool things that happens early on is that we get a confirmation that for this leap anyway, whether or not it's consistent, who knows, we'll see in the future, I suppose, but for this leap anyway, the leaps run concurrently with HQ time, because magic specifically says we've only got an hour, and we know that Ben only has an hour. Mm-hmm. And so in this episode, the leaps run concurrently with project time. You know, there had been some question in the past about like, well, would they really have time to, you know, would Jen really have time to fly down and pick up Janice and come back, and, you know, over the course of this leap or whatever, how long has it been for Ben compared to how long it's been for them, etc. Anyway, so I really, you know, I enjoyed kind of getting that on-screen confirmation, which was cool. Ian falls asleep to air disaster television shows, which is hilarious to me, and they are awesome. And the way that misogyny is being used in the episode as kind of an obstacle for Ben, I think, is wonderful. You mentioned the cockpit moment earlier, where Ben walks in and is talking to the co-pilot and the pilot, and, you know, has difficulty getting through to them because, of course, you know, it's 1971, and the captain, who is, of course, horribly misogynistic, is and predatory at that fact, is not going to listen to a woman in his cockpit until she can fly the plane. You know, which I dug. I also love the fact that we get this kind of and it comes from magic, which is really lovely, because we've talked about this before, about the, like, in our head canon, especially with what we saw in somebody up there like Ben, if magic has benefited from some sort of like therapy and in his own mind, you know, is working towards the destigmatization of mental health, especially as it probably relates to military vets. And we know that the captain of the plane is a military vet, served in World War II and Korea, or Korea and Vietnam. No, because he says Battle of the Bulge, so I think it's probably World War II and Korea, not Vietnam.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
anyway, and his mental health is a factor. They believe in the crash because there's been a lot of issues with medication, that sort of stuff. So I love the kind of the touching back on that theme of mental health, which of course we saw explored also in the last episode, and we've seen explored a number of times throughout the course of this. Stand by Ben being another example season, which is it's nice to kind of have that touchstone in a way. Ian's use of Reddit as a research tool, and the fact that the Reddit commenter was Oswald was an alien 117.
Yes.
which we've not had time to do, but I'm wondering, is that some sort of weird Easter egg that we haven't made the connection with yet?
Well, I love Ian's comment. Like, no, like, yeah, they're pretty spot on other threads.
Yeah.
Which,
because we know that Ian is like a conspiracy nut, right? Like we know that they love that stuff. They've talked about it before, which is great. Which gave us that amazing line about gender that we had, a few episodes back. But the also their self-doubt throughout the course of the episode, which I think mirrored a little bit of Ben's self-doubt, which is really lovely in a lot of important ways, I feel like, which was gonna, again, we'll look back after next week, I think, and have even more appreciation for. I love the way that they were having to deal with this self-doubt and having the fact that they were taking personally the shutdown of Ziggy. I love that Jen is the one that comforts them, that Jen is the one that kind of like, has that sort of moment of just sort of like, no, like, we need you. And in some ways, and again, this is not me trying to advocate for Ziggy not being a part of the show anymore, anything like that. I would love to have Ziggy, live long and prosper. That said, it's almost like Jen was saying, we need you more than we need Ziggy. And I think that again, the idea that this show is so much focused on these human beings, especially as opposed to, the technology that might be assisting them, was a great moment. Without you, we'd truly be lost. Sure. And I think that is going to echo in the next episode a great deal, because I think that literally the reason why we're seeing the project the way that it is at the end, and we're going to get to this in just a second, is I don't think any of them are alive. I think the only one that survived all of this is Ian. I think everyone else is dead. And I think that Jen's line, without you, we'd truly be lost, is going to echo in so much as like, if future Ian does not go back in time, and in essence, I will still stand by this, sacrifice themselves in order to make sure that everyone else lives. Like that, without Ian, they would truly be lost. Which I also think is great. Oh, I love the fake out with the poisoning of the hijacker, where the hijacker's all like, you drink it, drink the water, because Ben tries to hand the hijacker water. And Ben's just like, and Ben even has that moment where it's like, oh, okay, fine. And then drinks the water. And of course, that's not where the poison was, or the Quaaludes were at all. I love the way that's all set up too. I thought that was done very well. It was done subtle enough that it made, that it didn't feel forced, and yet it was done overtly enough that it made sense when it happened. So the insulin from Zelda, the older woman, the Quaaludes from the, the
I think in the credits it's like sleepy rocker dude. Yeah.
Yeah. I love the fact that the passengers at some point in first class just kind of take over, and that we get this idea that even without Ben there, that the gunshots still would have happened. Like the passengers still would have tried to revolt. Which I think is kind of interesting. I love the MacGyver, tactic of making their own sleeping gas, and getting it in there. But yeah, back to, just back to the finish real quick. Ian is the hologram coming in, seeing Ian there. Ben remembering Ian right away. Ben remembering that they used to karaoke duet under pressure.
I love the karaoke bit. Yeah.
We better fucking see that.
Yeah.
Like I want, like that is Chekhov's gun right now. Okay. Like Ian and Ben's under pressure. Yeah. Ian and Ben's under pressure is the new Chekhov's gun. Like they better show us that at some point. And again, like just the interaction between the two of them, and the fact that they were both able to use their senses of humor, to kind of get through this difficult moment, in spite of Ian so clearly wanting to have this conversation with Ben, about him leaping and about the fact that they're going to leap. Like, it starts and then it stops. The way that they joke with one another. I mean, one of the funniest goddamn moments of the whole series, as far as I'm concerned, is when, Ian tells the joke and is like, it's a little bit funny. That was awesome.
Yeah. And and like, I've only watched this episode once this afternoon. Did they have a discussion about an acknowledgement that Ben knows that Ian is going to leap back at some point in the future? That Ian is the one? because I felt like there was a moment where they acknowledged that, and I was like, wait, did they ever talk about that in an episode? Like Ben learning that Ian is the one that's going to do it? Are we supposed to take away the fact that like Ben like now has memory of it? Because from Ben's perspective, like if his memory comes back, he should remember that, right?
Yeah. I honestly don't know. I mean, hell, I've watched the episode twice today, and I honestly am not 100% clear on that. As you asked me that question, I'm inclined to say like, no, that wasn't discussed. But at the same time, now that you're saying it, I'm kind of like, yeah, maybe it was kind of actually sort of hinted at.
I know. I feel like I don't know. I have to go back and watch because to me, like that seems like a big deal. Because like to me, it was a big deal that Ben instantly remembered Ian. So I would think if there was a moment in a previous episode, where like Ben is told that Ian is going to be the one that leaps to tell him to leap, we would remember that.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll go back. Sorry, listeners. This is what happens when two tired dads are recording at 10:30 at night.
This is how the sausages get made.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, like let's head to the finish line. But I just loved seeing them together so much. I love the idea that there's like a federal employee trivia team, like league or whatever, and that without Ben, they just no longer are any good. Which I just think is awesome. I just love seeing them together so much. The applause that Ian gets when they step out of the imaging chamber. Jen say that she was dizzy did she say she was dizzy for a week? Or I might
dizzy for a week.
Yeah, after she got
of course she was dizzy for a week. She had COVID.
So glad you're feeling better, Nanrissa. Also, by the way, you're probably not listening. You're not listening because you don't listen to these things. But if you were, I would also say that your fucking outfit was awesome at WonderCon. I thought that was a really cool moment. The way that they all got brought back together. I really loved the wrap up, and I loved out of the wrap up we got that great Addison moment where she said we always get the wrap up, but we never. Everybody gets one except for Ben.
Sure.
And I just thought that was cool. And then, of course, we get the moment where they can't find Ben. That Ian is like, usually I can get a signature. There's even the question of like, well, it's because Ziggy's offline. It's like, no, usually I can at least get, an idea, a signature or something. They can't find Ben at all. And that's because Ben is in the future. And It's snowing in LA. It's nuclear winter. And Ian is holding a torch behind him. And they come out looking older and sounding pretty raspy and saying, I've been waiting for you a very long time.
A long time. So the question is, has Ben leaped as himself? Or has Ben leaped into another survivor? And if he has leaped into another survivor, is that other survivor someone from PQL?
As of right now? I am saying that
like what we know is right now. Yeah.
Oh yeah. As of right now, I'm saying this is without any, I like any foreknowledge that I have had about the finale or anything like has pretty much already like this leap out covers most of the extent of it. So I'm not talking, knowing things or anything. I'm literally like just guessing here. I am saying that Ben leapt as himself. That there's something about the way that Ian addresses Ben that just feels to me like they are seeing Ben and not someone else.
I mean, that was my takeaway. It was just after the fact, like, oh, like it's possible that he could.
It is, and that would be very interesting too.
I'm just saying, after last week, Ziggy's a mole. No, Ziggy's not really a mole. Just Future is using Ziggy. It better be a nuclear winter. That's all I'm saying. It better be a nuclear winter, and not just like, no, it's just really cold in LA this winter. And like, I've just been waiting for you for a long time. Anyway, I'm being snarky now. I'm being snarky.
Well, look, we can draw a few things. We know that Ziggy's been destroyed. We see that panel with Ziggy's name on it. Even like, I mean, the project is completely destroyed. I have a lot of theories. A lot of. I'm curious about a lot of things. it will be very interesting to see how they pay that off, especially knowing what we know about, an atomic bomb going off being like one of the things that gets mentioned in Genesis as being, the way for Sam to possibly get home. Like, was there some sort of nuclear reaction that happened with the accelerator as a result of trying to get someone home, perhaps, or as a result of somebody tampering with it just in general. There's a lot of stuff that I feel like they could play with it, and maybe not at all. It could just be that there's a leaper that wanted to destroy the project, and they just put a dirty bomb down the hole and blew the whole thing up or whatever. Who knows? But that wouldn't explain a nuclear winter in LA necessarily. Maybe it would. But man, I mean, I'm all in. We're gonna see what happens. I also think that this is not going to be Ben's only leap. I think we're going to see Ben leap again within the course of the episode. Maybe more than once.
Yeah. And
I'm not just saying the leap out. I mean literally like within the course of the episode. Yeah. I just have a feeling, I said this once before. I have a feeling that the episode is going to be centered mostly around Ben and Ian. I think we're going to get to see a lot of Martinez throughout the course of the episode as well. I'm very curious as to how much of the rest of our regulars we'll see. Like, I would not be surprised if we don't see a lot of, Magic, Addison, and Jen. And I'm really curious if we're going to see Janice at all. I hope we do. I think we should. I think she should, be there. I mean, I hesitate to say should, but it would be nice. It would just be nice. I think it would be an effective choice to see Janice in the finale in some capacity. Although I guess on the same token, maybe at this particular point, we've learned everything we can learn from Janice as it pertains to this season and this season finale. So maybe we don't need to see her, but I sure as hell hope we continue to see her as the show goes on. Give us a spinoff. Yeah, look, I'm jazzed. I really, really, really am. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you were disappointed in this one. But I hope we come back next week. And my genuine hope is, and maybe not, my genuine hope is that any disappointment or most of the disappointment that you had over this episode will perhaps be reversed a little bit, or at least taken a little bit in the other direction by what happens in the finale. Because I believe, and maybe I'm putting too much stock in the finale, but I believe that the finale could provide some of the stuff that maybe we were looking for in this episode that we didn't get. And I think that there's an opportunity to do that. I think they've got something up their sleeve, something very, very interesting. I'm curious as to how much we'll see at the end of the episode, though, that will propel us into next season. But I do think there's something. I think there's something coming. And I think that, hey, we've only just begun, right? Like, this is just the end of season 1. We are in the end game now. All right. Well, in that case, let me just say, take care of yourselves. Stay safe out there. Take care of one another. And always, always, always remember to leap responsibly. Which you have to wonder. Do you think Ian leaped responsibly? Did Ben leap responsibly? Did Sam leap responsibly? Maybe I shouldn't be saying leap responsibly.